Hello there, my name's Card. Here on my YouTube page, as of late, I've been discussing a lot of fairly political topics which interest me. But, just like in real life, even the most ardent activist needs to remember to give themselves a break every now and then and unwind. To that end, today I'd like to talk about something entirely unrelated which interests me. 90s PC first-person shooter games. I grew up playing a lot of them, I'm a big fan of the genre, and I still bust a fair few of them out for a lazy night in every once in a while. Going into this video, I'd hope that the people who stick with me for this one are themselves aware of what 90s first-person shooters are like, and the basic conventions of the medium. But just in case you're not, these games were essentially about finding your way through simple mazes while fighting a big horde of disposable enemies. You run around fast, carry a bunch of weapons. Both story-wise and mechanically, they're pretty simple. But there's a reason that even as computer technology improved and games became a more nuanced art form, plenty of people were just fine to stick with the basic run-and-gun mid-90s titles for years and years. And now, we've seen a renaissance of sorts of that type of game, as people remake the same basic concept for modern computers, and best of all, plenty of FPS games from the 90s are being properly polished up and re-released by people who evidently care enough to ensure it's done well. But specifically getting into the topic I wanted to talk about today, a lot of people familiar with 90s shooters will tell you that Doom is among the best of them. It's got a memorable sci-fi meets hell aesthetic, made a heap of technological innovations, and is pretty fun to actually play. But there's another title that came out around the same time called Rise of the Triad. It's similar in many respects, but it's usually considered the lesser of the two. And while I won't say something I don't believe, I also won't shy away from being deliberately contrarian either. So for a change of pace, today I want to make the case that Rise of the Triad was actually always better than Doom. To begin, usually the consensus that it's the other way round begins with the fact that Doom has a handful of more technologically advanced features. Like how the Doom engine can draw the edges of walls at angles other than just 90 degrees, whereas Rise of the Triad and its predecessor, Wolfenstein 3D, can't. So Doom does have that going. The fact that Doom can approximate curved vertical surfaces is, I would concede, something it does better, but that's just about it mechanically. Even on just a purely technical level, Triad does a bunch of stuff Doom can't touch it on. For one thing, it has a real traversable height axis. The world of Doom only exists on a single two-dimensional plane. It simulates the appearance of height, but Triad's engine can actually have one element of the game world over another, and it makes use of it too. Rise of the Triad's levels have a lot of verticality in a way Doom fundamentally can't. Similarly, of the two, it's only possible to move both vertical and horizontal level geometry itself in Rise of the Triad. In Doom, levels aren't that dynamic. It has doors you can open, and occasionally a false wall disappears so monsters can come out from behind and get you, but Triad goes two steps further by also supporting freely moving wall architecture and even rideable platforms that can smoothly go vertically and horizontally. That alone was a massive technological leap at the time, and Doom doesn't come close to having anything similar. Other fairly ticky-tacky little points about where Triad also beats out the competition include its proto-volumetric lighting engine, which is more dynamic and more resource efficient than the alternative texture workaround the Doom dev team implemented. Similarly, the Rise of the Triad enemy AI is more complex. It can find its way around properly, whereas Doom's baddies basically just know how to look at the player character and attack. And all of the Triad enemies have fully voiced call-outs and shouts for when they spot you, or when they start shooting and plead for their life, whereas all the Doom monsters mostly just make a grunt when they die. On a technical level, For all people like to call Doom an innovator, it lacked quite a bit that other games could easily pull off. Not to mention that back in the day, Rise of the Triad still ran significantly better on lower spec computers than Doom. As for actual gameplay, and not just comparing what's under each game's respective hood, I for one still prefer to champion Rise of the Triad's core design concept of making the gameplay itself engaging and varied, not just flashy or pretty. For example, Doom gives you an expansive arsenal of weapons that all look and sound different, but they're largely all just the same gameplay-wise. You just point them at the enemies and shoot. The pistol, the shotgun, the chain gun, and the plasma gun are all functionally the same. It does give you a rocket launcher, but realistically that's just another point-and-shoot weapon, except now you just can't be too close to your target. And the game's notorious big damage bonus weapon, the BFG, honestly ends up just being a bit of a gimmick that you'll probably only ever pull out for boss fights. In Rise of the Triad, they give you a couple bullet weapons basically right from the start that each have infinite ammo, so you don't have to go faffing about scrounging for ammo for your primary weapon. And then you've basically got about another 5 different rocket launchers that all fire different types of projectiles, plus a couple of magic big hitters for late in the game that are different again completely. Rise of the Triad gave you different ways to play the game, not just different particle effects coming out of a gun. Actually going through the levels themselves, you can argue that the colourful hellscapes of Doom are better to look at than the dingy grey-brown castle courtyards in Rise of the Triad, and I won't even push back there, but Rise of the Triad's levels themselves are much more dynamic and able to be interacted with. In Triad, there's a bunch of fun little interactions with the map and all the set dressing in it. It's not just where you play the game. Elements of the world can be destroyed during firefights, and will often prove to have been hiding a secret area or beneficial item. The health pickups scattered throughout the game are all little bowls of food that can be heated up if you hit them with an explosive weapon, and they'll heal you a little bit more, for example. There are things like flaming torches and braziers around that will realistically distract your heat-seeking rockets. There's extra bonuses for meeting hidden objectives by the time you get to the end of a level, and there's even an additional few Easter eggs here and there if the game detects that you're playing on a holiday like Easter or Christmas. Doom just doesn't have anything like that. It's not interactable. It does what it does well, but there's very little in it beyond just shoot monsters and find the level exit. Rise of the Triad has moving traps and jump pads, and it even had rocket jumping long before Quake ever did. Triad has a bunch of game-changing power-up abilities to find hidden deep in its levels that you can play around with, like flying and shooting chain lightning out of your hands and turning into a little beagle that runs around pressing switches with its paw. Doom's only power-ups are basically just a little bit of damage resistance and making it harder to see where you're going. Both games have difficulty options as well, of course, but Rise of the Triad additionally offers you 5 distinct playable characters, each with different stats like their health pool and their movement speed, so you can choose precisely what sort of skill floor and skill ceiling is going to be the most fun for you. All Rise of the Triad's enemy boss fights are unique and have their own moveset, whereas Doom's bosses are largely just souped-up versions of its regular monsters. Both games do go toe-to-toe with one another musically. There's a bunch of fantastic MIDI tracks in either. That's just a matter of personal preference. Although I do prefer the poppy up-tempo hits in Rise of the Triad's OST over the digital sort of thrash rock of Doom. All in all, between Rise of the Triad's 40-ish levels, its standalone shareware campaign, and its official Extreme Rise of the Triad expansion pack, it's also got more than double the levels vanilla Doom has, and the levels themselves are usually bigger. Frankly, with everything Rise of the Triad does that its direct competitors didn't do, I don't know how it got so overshadowed by Doom. Somehow, Doom just ended up the much more eminently recognizable title. Granted, it's a great game too, of course, but I feel the zeitgeist really got it wrong on this one. Ultimately, you can't objectively say one game is better than the other, but you are allowed to have an opinion, and I firmly believe Rise of the Triad is much better mechanically and much more fun than the original Doom to play, and it'd be the one I'd recommend to anyone who asks. Still, Rise of the Triad made its mark. It's a cult classic among plenty of people for good reason, and it forever popularized ludicrous jibs with its iconic over-the-top gore and its frenetic off-the-wall tone. Plus, Rise of the Triad's developers, Apogee Software, went on to become 3D Realms Studios and kept pursuing the central concept of interactability and digitized sprites with the build engine, making Duke Nukem 3D and Shadow Warrior and overseeing the development of Blood, all of which are top-tier titles among the second generation of 90s shooters. And I feel that alone entirely vindicates the path taken by Rise of the Triad's original developers. id Software's Doom was followed up by Doom 2, more of the same. Then they split up because the tech nerd side of the office wanted to pursue polygonal models and real 3D, but the design side couldn't settle on whether they wanted to do more demonic sci-fi or fantasy or Lovecraftian horror or something else entirely. Eventually, those two paths got us Quake and Quake 2, a pair of decently fun, if dry tech demos, and Daikatana, a critical and commercial flop that overextended itself trying to be flashy rather than focusing on having actual fun or innovative gameplay. Nowadays, there's a million different ways to play all these 90s games if you want. Pirating them is easy, any system can play them, and there's usually about 20 years worth of mods and custom maps available at the click of a button somewhere. But the real reason I chose to bring up this argument today is, you may well know this if you're an aficionado of old first-person shooters, but Rise of the Triad just received a re-release with modern hardware optimization and updated graphics and quality of life improvements, and a whole new campaign on both Steam and goodoldgames.com, courtesy of retro shooter remake pros Night Dive Studios and darling publisher New Blood. The remake itself is called Ludicrous Edition. You can find it easily if you just search. If you do want to play Rise of the Triad, either to see how well it's held up since 1994, or just to try for the first time, that's the version I'd recommend. It's good. I know it's good because I got a hold of New Blood CEO Dave Oshry's private email and politely asked for a copy, and he obliged. That's the other moral of this video. There's never any harm in asking for something. Worst the other person can do is just say no, and you might get the thing you wanted out of it. In conclusion, Rise of the Triad is better than Doom. You should get the new version, and if Dave Oshry could be so kind as to also send me Steam keys for Ultrakill, Gloomwood, Medieval, Faith, and Dusk 82, that would be real swell because I don't have those ones yet. Bye for now, and have a lovely day.